And it applauded for that. Brilliant film. And gentleman beside you. What was it say? But actuality. So does actuality mean? I know you don't do drama. Reenactments. Do you think that would help?
I think it does. It definitely does. So, including dramatic points in documentary. See, because we have to, divorce ourselves from this notion that everything in a documentary film has to be real. It has to reflect this notion of actuality. And so, I teach documentary filmmaking at UBC, and I'm always encouraging my students to think outside the box and to include creative elements, because those creative elements help to tap into emotions that I referred to in the presentation, and that sort of emotion can help engender understanding and experience. So when a group makes a film that has dramatic reenactments or poetry or whatever, in ways to interpret emotion, then I think that's great. And if you don't want to call it documentary, so be it, but I call that documentary as well.
Okay, just back up there, I forgot this question, but so actuality, geez, I forgot my question. Go on, please.
Well, that was good. That was a good question. And of course, mentioning Japanese Canadian tournament, I think it's fantastic what Ryan's doing. I love it. I really do, because as someone in the Japanese Canadian community who also fought against the government, and also I see the same parallels with regards to silences in the community and how trauma silences stories.
Well, I know my answer to that now. I know my answer to, we lost a lot of people there. So that's the the history is, we don't have those people anymore. So you have to do the drama.
Yeah, no, for sure. So there is a little bit of a difference when you're not using oral history and you're sort of doing primary research, which is fine too. And even in All Our Fathers Relations, we have some animated sequences because it goes further back than we have any records or any archival for. So, and the animated sequences are based on their stories, but are really dramatic elements. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Who's next?
Just a short comment.
Okay.
No, I really, for both the films, wonderful in relation to the effective responses. So successful, and I actually agree totally with both of you in the ways that the methods that you're using are able to sort of allow viewers in their multiple positions, right? So rather than that one true story that you were mentioning, Alejandro, right? But allowing this opening of this complex history, and then particularly in relation to like the East Europeans, and also I'm actually from Northern Europe, I'm Finnish Canadian, right? So all these histories of the past, which they have up to date, I would say, have tended to be quite celebratory about, especially like as an example, the Finns doing the labor stuff and all that. But in fact, many people who suffered those terrible traumas are now repeating racisms against Muslims, against people who are brown, and because they don't know their histories, right? They don't know that some of their relatives were in camps or whatnot, and they were discriminated against. So I think it's really powerful that we tell those stories, so that those who are racist today, right, and benefiting from their white privilege and all the hard work of their ancestors who denied that history and hid it and changed their names and all that, that's going to come out now. So
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, one last question.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And we're just going to get our next crowd because we're very limited. So 30 seconds. Go for it.
Me, Alejandro. It's like the Lady Gaga song.
Okay. You have made an interesting comment about it's really interesting to dig and excavate into the motivation behind what compels people to do things. You use suicide.
That's true.
As a documentarian, I have encountered major problems in getting to discover how can I discover the motivation behind the wild piece in that. And for instance, there is no separation of church and state in Canada. Yet the Catholic Church still tells me and tells investigative reporters that they don't have to divulge any documents from the priests or the bishops. until they've been dead for 50 years.
Really?
So that's one example. My other example is I do Cold War research. And Canada, unlike the United States, can hold Cold War documents hostage forever.
Yeah.
So as a documentarian, it's very challenging to, I want to understand the motivations of people and why they do what they do, but in certain cases it can be very, very challenging.
No, and reticence in oral history interviews is a huge issue. And you can ask someone about a past that you know they were a part of, but they don't necessarily, divulge that. And then of course there's the interview space as well. So good luck with that. I think we have to.
Yeah. Okay.
We're
So,
rounding up.
thank you so much. I want to thank Ryan and Alejandro so much for being here. It was a great discussion. We did videotape it and had some technical difficulties with the stream, but you'll be able to share it once we post it, and we'll be posting it right away. I would like to introduce three.
Should we let people do a quick washroom break and then we can do? I can do the intro if you want. I don't know where Colorado needs to.
Yeah. It's just we're very tight for time, so if people want to sneak out and do the washroom, they can do that and come back in. The reason that we'd like to start this session right away is because the films start at 2 p.m. and we also have a book launch at 1:30. So we don't want to. And we've got 3 people here, so I'd just like to introduce Albert Karvonen, Pirkko Karvonen, and Eva Karvonen. I'm going to, I'll do the technical stuff for you for a second. I just want to, you found it? Yeah. Okay. This one's going to be, just give us a second. Okay.
So what we thought we would do, I'm here with my mother and father. I made a film about my dog, a documentary about my father. I'm going to show a clip from the film that's going to be screened later today. Then I'm going to do a little talk, and it's interesting because we all kind of chose to talk about story today. I'm going to talk about story. Then I'm going to introduce my father, who will have 10 minutes, and we'll show. We won't be able to show. I don't know if I can show a clip from your film because I brought the DVD, but we've got the 3 DVDs for sale for $20 each. And they'll also be at the table at the festival. And then I'm going to introduce my mom, and she'll go last, and she's going to talk a little bit about story in her film and characters. So let me
flip that on. This is for posterity.
Tight schedule.
We got a tight schedule here, but we're doing good. We're doing good.
Let me know if this is going to.
Oh.
Take that off.
Oh. Don't lose that. Okay. Wonderful.
Show a clip here.
Yeah, it's good.
Do you want to just grab the lights?
I've been lucky in my life. I've experienced some of the great spectacles, like the Karvonen migration, the wildebeest migration, whales, thousands and thousands and thousands of snow geese, the millions of shorebirds in the Bay of Fundy. I have been involved in 2 careers. My first career was teaching, and from teaching I moved into filmmaking. And in the course of the second career, I've produced over 100 nature films. And nature has done so much for me. I feel that I want to give back as much as I can to defend nature, to fight for the environment.
Okay, I'm going to pause there. And if you want to see the film, you can come later to see it. Just, I'll close this for now. So first first of all, I want to know a little bit about who are the people that we have in the room. So who's from Thunder Bay? Okay, and how many of you are filmmakers? Storytellers? Okay, how many of you, your family's been in Canada for more than 100 years? Okay, and how many of us are families of immigrants? Okay, so thinking to origin of story and early storytelling, it goes back, if you think about early stories, representation, pictographs, cave drawings, hieroglyphics. I mean, storytelling isn't something new. What's changed is how we tell our stories, and that's why I think it's kind of interesting to follow the other two filmmakers who also talked about storytelling. Winters, long dark nights, think about when it was really cold outside. What did people do in the evening? Gathered around a fire and they told stories. And you guys can help me out here. What were some of the topics of the stories?
Family.
Family. What might have been things that people would tell around a fire? What kind of stories?
Myths and legends.
Myths and legends. Battle, we talked about this earlier. Maybe stories of war, the history of the hunting. Hunting.
Food for a family.
Yeah, the big fish, the big fish that got away, or the big moose with the big rack on it, or being attacked by an animal and surviving in the bush overnight, survival skills, stories of creation. So storytelling's not new, but the types of stories are kind of evolving. I think we're seeing a lot more stories about humanity. We're telling stories about being good citizens, being better parents. We still have some of those stories that are about hunting and gathering and how to live with other people. So what we're still seeing in these stories is sometimes there's a bit of a lesson in there. So we use stories as a way to educate and inform, but at the same time, we're entertaining people, because if we just said, here's how you do it, and gave people that information and that lesson, it wouldn't really give us much to sit around the fire. It'd be kind of boring after a while, right? If somebody just stood up there and lectured you, right? Part of us coming around and being around that story and talking to those people is we're being entertained. They're telling us a story, and a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So our job as storytellers is we're trying to find that beginning, middle, and end and put it into some kind of narrative structure, because at the end we want people to feel that they're satisfied with that story. Earlier speakers had talked a little bit about character, three-dimensional characters. So in choosing our subjects, we're choosing people who are three-dimensional characters, and we're trying to paint them or portray them as three-dimensional characters in our stories. And as storytellers, you know, we're telling stories in the platform of motion picture, but it's no different than telling the story live, or telling the story as you're writing it in a book, as Meredith's going to talk about her book, Corey, later, and thinking about how we're going to engage with our audience. So I guess for me, as a storyteller, and I'll tell you a little bit about my background, I have a degree in recreation and leisure studies. I grew up with a family. My mother became a filmmaker in her early 60s. And my father, you hear a little bit in the film, you'll learn a little bit more about him, but in his 40s he quit his full-time job as a teacher and principal of an elementary school, and he went full-time into filmmaking. So we can change our careers any time in life.
That's when I became insane.
Yeah. And now that we have this new technology, we have our smartphones. Lots of people are storytellers. We see that on Facebook and YouTube, that we can go out there and we can capture and tell stories. So for me, I have this degree in recreation and leisure studies. I've specialized in interpretation, which in a sense is storytelling, and it's telling it through different mediums. And I grew up with a family that always took me out into nature, and my parents live now in northern Alberta in a log house on a lake. We have a Finnish history in our family, and every time I go on this walk with my father, because he walks the same circuit all the time, I don't know if anyone ever read the book by Aldo Leopold, Sand County Almanac. And in the Sand County Almanac, he writes about the changes in the landscape, because he walks the same piece of land all the time, and he gets to know it really intimately, which is the relationship my parents both have with this place. They live in northern Alberta, which kind of relates back to the Finnish history, because it's a little bit like mini Finland, right? And through walking the land, and they have different guests, they entertain a lot at their place. He's always teaching us and showing us things on the land because he knows it so well. So because he's walked it every day, he can tell where the bird pooped, or the bear pooped, or the fox, the coyote pooped from yesterday, because it's funny, right? But it's true. He points out the poop, because the poop is the way you look for where the animals are. You can tell where they are by the signs they leave you. So because he's walked the land yesterday, he knew the poop wasn't there, and today it's there. That's part of the story. So each time I go out with him, I would learn something new. Okay, well, my parents, as you know, they're not young people. My father's 86, my mom is 83. That's the right ages, right?
That's right.
You're allowed to tell those ages?
And,
TMI.
I know they're not going to be here forever, right? So part of us as storytellers, we talk about sharing history. And I think my parents are pretty cool people, and I always learn something from my father. And because my dad's a little older, I get to tell his story first, and I'm getting the pressure from mom, I got to tell her story next. But I thought, how do I capture and share their story so when they're no longer here with us, because they will die at some point, how do I share that story? Because I love them, and I like the fact that every time I walk the land with Dad, he helps me look at the world in a new way. I bring my point of view to my storytelling, he brings his point of view to his storytelling. We all bring our collective experience. So what I wanted to do is share with the audience my father. And so I was fortunate enough to get a small Arts Council grant, and I know for us as filmmakers, one of the biggest challenges, it's not cheap to tell a story for the screen like this, because it's usually not just yourself, it involves other people, and you can only ask so many people to work for free, and this is how we make a living, which is why we sell our DVDs when we go to festivals. And so the whole idea was that then how do we fund it? So I got a small Arts Council grant, and then I opened my own pocket, my own bank book, and that's how I told the story. So for me then, to be able to take it to an audience is great, because we want people to hear our stories. And in the sense of when I wanted to tell the story at first, I thought about telling the story about how my father sees the world and walking the land with him through the 4 seasons. And through the different 4 seasons, he was going to reflect on his life, his worldview, and also share with us his worldview as a filmmaker, because he looks at the world quite differently from other people and as a naturalist. What ended up happening is there's always many different layers to your story that you think you set up with one story, and then other stories are revealed to you. So the story is also about preparing for death. It's going to happen to all of us at some point. So at their point in their life, my parents both are in this mode that they are preparing for death. They're thinking about the legacy they leave behind, the legacy they leave with us as a family. And for me, it was really interesting because as a filmmaker and a storyteller, you get to ask people questions on camera that you don't usually get to ask people at dinner table conversations. Unless you're me, and I dig a lot and pry into people's lives because I'm truly interested in it. But the camera gives you that opportunity. And sometimes when you put the camera on people, they tell you stories that you didn't even expect. And I find it really an honor as a filmmaker. That's the part that I like, is that when you give people the opportunity to speak, quite often they reveal something to you that you didn't know, even your own parents. And so I would say what I've learned in life is make sure that we are recording those stories, whether it be just using the voice memo function on our smartphone, but we also know that when our families go, they take their stories with them, and we can keep on the tradition by the oral storytelling. But it also helps, because our memories are selective, to record some of those things, because I think we all want to know our history of our story of how we came to Canada, and our kids might want to know that history and that story, and it's relevant to other people in the world. That's why I like the idea of these web series, because we have this kind of online, personally curated museum, and that's what our stories are, is we're curators of our kind of common history. Let me just check my notes to see what else I want to talk about. Yeah, and I guess storytelling is not new either, because we even think about children. Children engage in play, and when they engage in play, we think about King of the Castle. I grew up, we played war games, and quite often we play like the Prince and Princess games or doctor games, and it's all about trying to sort out the world and figure out where we are, where we fit in, and what other people think about the world too. And it's a way of still through engaging in that story, and we continuously are engaging in it because we're also figuring out our own lives as our roles change as we age, as we become students, we learn jobs, we learn how to interact with other people, we become parents, become grandparents, and we prepare for end of life. And so I think that's why I really like story, and why I'm really compelled to other people's stories is it helps me sort out the world, because I don't have all the answers, and I learn from other people just by asking them about themselves. So I think I'll end there, and what I want to do is I'm just going to check my website really quick, because I did bring DVDs. I wasn't thinking about technology and how a lot of laptops don't have DVD players. I'm just going to see if I've got a clip of Dad's film, and if not, you guys can purchase a copy later. I think I have a clip of yours. But with that, so, why do I tell stories? Once again, I picked Dad, and if you guys get a chance to see the film later, I think it's at, what time is the screening at today? 2 o'clock at the church. Let me do a quick check, and then Dad, if you want to come up.
Okay.
Let me just see what else I have on that. So Dad, are you going to stand? Yeah, I've got a clip here. So perfect.
As the great northern boreal forests of Canada, Russia, Scandinavia, and Alaska face an uncertain future, Albert too is running against the clock. Surviving a stroke 4 years ago heightens the urgency to complete his final film. The Forest is Calling captures the heart of the boreal forests in Alberta and Finland through the lens and experiences of Albert Karvonen.
I'm going to do a mic swap. Put this one on Dad.
Well, she's doing the mic swap. Being a school administrator and teacher, always said, I don't need a mic.
But you do, because this is for the live
I know,
broadcast.
I
It's
know.
not to, I
That's
don't know
why
if
I'm
I want
getting
to
ready.
stand up. I'm being bossy with my dad. Okay, that should work.
Excellent.
And then keep in mind the camera's there, so you need to be closer, you need to be about in here.
Oh, it bossed me around.
She's a director.
Her presentation this morning about storytelling reminded me of a story that happened in my childhood at probably about age 7 or 8. Mother and Dad took us blueberry picking. So, the Finns, they love blueberries too. And anyway, we went camping and in the jack pine forest, and a huge fire, and there was story time. And I remember my younger brother telling this story about the black bear and how smart that black bear is. And Mum was listening, and then he turned around and told his Mum, "Mutta kyllä se karhu oli viisas." In Finnish, means, boy, that bear was smart. So yeah, that's the art of storytelling. And so that's my background from way back in the late 30s, early 40s, going blueberry picking. But all my life, I've had the good fortune of living in the forest. And even when we moved to Edmonton and then to Sherwood Park, we lived in the forest and made films about the forest. So I speak as a naturalist more now than even as a filmmaker. We sold our company shares 5 years ago, and so this film that she showed a clip of is just something we did personally. Forest is Calling. But I think that nature is extremely important. In fact, as Albert Einstein said, nature
is so important for us that if you look deep into nature, you will understand everything better. Which I thought was pretty tremendous about Albert Einstein, physicist, scientist. And recently I've been watching a new series of nature programs. I don't watch too much television, really, but my wife and I do watch BBC Earth, Love Nature, CBC, CTV, with their Discovery Channel programs that they had years ago. And my pitch to you as a retired filmmaker is that we need to make films. Witness what we just heard this morning. That's why films are important. You bring out issues. But to me, my whole background has been nature. We produced over 120 films, which were on television. And I always said as a teacher, it's fine to do slide presentations, which we did. And we did kits for schools, slide kits. But can you imagine you have a film and you can get it on television? It's not 30 or 40 or 100 or 200 or 500 people, but in the millions. Our programs, you know, sold through distributors to over 100 countries in the world. So I had a good friend of mine who sent me a book one time, Lynch, the great photographer from Calgary, complimentary book, and in it he wrote, "For Albert, who brings nature to millions." And I think that's the power of film. So I invite young filmmakers to get involved in producing films and try to get them on television. That's not the only way. I mean, there's public audiences such as this that you can do within your communities, which we are doing right now in our community of Athabasca, Boyle, nonprofit groups, seniors groups, hunting groups. Get the message out. The planet Earth needs nature films more than any other time in history. Why? Well, look at the world today. I'm not trying to dwell on the negative. I'm saying there's so much to be done in filmmaking or media, as we know it in terms of what we're doing. It's extremely important to raise the issues, as the two filmmakers did this morning. And so in nature too, we need to talk about global warming, climate change. There are two, and I'm very optimistic about this, there are two presidents in the world today. They're both not presidents anymore. One was Mikhail Gorbachev, who went to the Antarctic at the invitation of Cousteau, and he says that the world, we have problems in climate change. Barack Obama said before he left his presidency that we face drought, floods, climate change of all kinds. Now, we can either do something or suffer the consequences. It's not hard to look today that we see some of the consequences in the global setting. So as a naturalist, again, I'm saying that's the great challenge for you people, the young people. As the president of Norway said at the International Film Festival one day, well, most of us are going to be dead shortly. It's the young people that are going to face the consequences of our lifestyle, of the ways we treat nature. So that's the pitch. And you know, nature is the most powerful way to try to bring greater awareness. A picture is worth 1,000 words. It's still true today as it ever is. And I'm so happy to be able to be talking to a group like this too, the future filmmakers. It's fun. You don't have to be a martyr to make films. I have no formal training in filmmaking, except to watch other people's films. And the best model for me has always been the BBC Earth, or the BBC. Gone to international conferences and participated in them. But always trying to find the story. Nature is full of stories. And you don't have to necessarily come up with a big structured story. A woodpecker is a woodpecker. Find out all you can about the woodpecker and go ahead and film. And you will be a winner at the end anyway. Because nature is so beautiful and so powerful that it just automatically has people all over the world that are interested in nature. Anyway, so there's ways to finance it too. My wife, my daughter's signaled to me that I've done enough here. But so, on a positive note, I'm so happy that we have a community such as this in Thunder Bay doing this kind of community thing, because I think community is important. Not everything in TIFF always, but here in the community, at the grassroots. Thank you.
Woo!
That's why we go head to head with TIFF every year.
So I'm going to do a quick introduction for my mom, and then I'll show a clip from her film, and I'm going to let her talk. But my father's family was, my father's born in Canada. His family immigrated to Canada in the early 1920s, and my mom's an immigrant. And she's been a textile artist most of her life, so she's been telling stories through art. And filmmaking is also an art, so she's taken her medium. So she's still a weaver, still a textile artist, but she's decided in her 60s, a couple of years ago, that she also wanted to tell motion picture stories. And a lot of her stories relate to her being an artist, so she's told some stories about artists, but her stories also tie back into her cultural connection and her history to other Finns and other immigrant, particularly from the Finnish community in Canada. So let me show a clip from her film, and I'm going to mic Mum up, and then you can have you've got the mic. Here you go. I'm going to just drop this through the front of your top. You can have it here, just drop it in. At the bottom. Sure.
To my Ukrainian friend this morning, or fellow of Ukrainian background, I do know a little bit Ukrainian because I was brought up amongst Ukrainians. Дуже добре, which means very good, his presentation.
Here, why don't I show this clip while I fiddle with the microphone? I'll just go off to the side.
She was a lead violinist, and she realized there was no kids playing fiddles in the Delta, and she thought that was quite sinful.
It's really important, the work she's doing in the Aboriginal community to keep fiddling alive.
Certainly one of a kind, if anybody knows she was better. She has an energy that is totally captivating. Amazing person and a lot to teach us.
I'm standing on a rug that is full of ladybugs. My name, Pirkko, means ladybug in the Finnish language in poetic form. When it's used in poetic form, it's called Pirkko. Anyway, I never had any idea that I was going to be making any films. We started our company, Karvonen Films, some 40 years ago, and I was always the so-called go-awaster. In wildlife, one walks the other person to the blind, and then I go away. So the birds think that you're gone. So when I was over 60, I wanted Albert to make a film on Sointula. I had always read about the stories and history about Sointula. And somewhere along the line, I was at a Finnish conference in Sudbury, and I met a woman who was going to be going to Sointula. She had a doctorate and she was working at a university in the States. So she asked me to go to Sointula with her. So both Albert and I did go to Sointula with her, and that's where my idea of my first film came, was from that trip.
Can you maybe say what Sointula is?
Sointula is a Finnish utopian colony on Malcolm Island. It was started in 1900s, and it was started by Matti Kurikka, who was a utopian socialist. Finland was not independent at the time, and he wanted to have a Finland somewhere. So that's how it got started. And he did get, the first people came from United States, and then later people from Finland, because he was advertising it in all kinds of writing and so on. So anyway, when I was showing this film in Minneapolis, I came upon my friend here, Meredith Fuller, whose book we also have here. She's going to be doing a spiel on her book, which deals partly with the Finnish immigration.
How did you tell why did you want us to tell Andrea's story?
Okay, so anyway, I was making a film, another film on Finnish immigration in Toronto, and we were at the Finnish seniors' home. So I was told that there's a lady here who's a violinist, that you should meet her. She's visiting her mother. So that's how I met Andrea, and we did actually some footage on her, which I used on the Andrea film called Strings Across the Sky. And her name is Hansen, but that's not what her father's name was, and it was not her married name. I think somewhere along the line, when her father went to look for a job, he had to change his name, because they would say, oh, we're not hiring any Finlanders, but if you come back tomorrow, your name is Johnson or Hansen or whatever in this case was given the name to him. So he was born in a place called Newfoundland in Saskatchewan. And you don't find Newfoundland on the map, but there are history books written that are called Newfoundland. And Nancy Matson, who was an editor at the University of Alberta, wrote a book on Newfoundland. And that is where Andrea's roots are. So she met a person in Yellowknife when she was with the Toronto Symphony. She later became a violinist in Montreal Symphony and later Toronto Symphony. So this native person was lamenting that the fiddling was dying in the Canadian North, that something had to be done about it. So that together they both worked together and started Strings Across the Sky. So that's what this film is about.
Perfect timing, because we're almost out of time here. So I was just going to say, to add to, Mom was talking about the immigrants changing their names. Finns were known for being agitators and being involved with the labor movement. So they knew if they had these Finlanders working with them that there might be trouble, they might try to unionize. So that's quite often what had happened, is they asked people change their names so they could get a job. And that's why a lot of immigrants ended up with different names, not to mention the fact that the immigration people couldn't spell their names. And I'll add just a point about Mom. So when she came to Canada, she was a teenager, and her name's Pirko, and my auntie's name is Maya. But when they went to school, they were asked to choose another name that would be easier for the teachers to say. And my mom's line to me always was, I had to learn a whole new language. The teacher only had to learn one word, my name. And it reminds me now as a teacher, because I teach part-time, that I have students there from different parts of the world, how important it is that I learn their name, because quite often, like my students, they'll take on a Canadian or English name just to make it easier or to fit in. But I think we should be proud of who we are and keep our names, because our names are part of our story of who we are.
Yeah, I have one more thing. I was given two names, Pat or Pearl, and I couldn't pronounce Pearl, so I chose Pat. Now, my first child was in grade 1, and he said, Mom, you should not go by a nickname. So I started changing my name, and all my papers, even my bank account was in this name, Pat. So it took some courage to go back to my name. There was a law in Finland, 1600s, that you had to read and write, or otherwise you couldn't get married. So in the archives in Ottawa, National Archives, all the records are kept, because every time Finns had a meeting, it was recorded. For example, the first meeting of the British Columbia Fishermen's Association, the records are in the Finnish language, because it's the Finns that started the Fishermen's Association.
So if you want to know about Finns in Canada, she's one of your go-to people. So a lot of times I'll be in a conference and somebody, for example, my friend Andrew Best was working for this Finnish games company in Canada, this Hava Hotel over at City TV many years ago. And he was talking on a panel, and he was talking about how he got this job because he had his Finnish passport as well, which I have. And I said, well, what's your Finnish side? And he goes, well, my mom's name is Varpu. And I said, Lindstrom Best? And he goes, yeah. And he goes, how do you know my mom? I said, my mom knows every Finn in Canada she's connected to. So I always think it's a great connection I have to my heritage, and as I age, my heritage becomes more important too. And now I'm kind of saying, oh, I gotta hurry and get all these stories from Mom, because she knows so much about this history of this Finnish migration in Canada, because she did migrate to Canada, and that's important to her. And I would say, a lot of us, we should make sure we are collecting stories from our family, because they'll take those stories with them. And there's different waves of migration to different parts of the world, and we know that that lingering bit of racism, I guess it's not lingering, it's still there, because when we think about the internment of Japanese, Chinese, Indigenous people with the residential schools and that racism, there's still a residual there. It didn't just go away, and we're seeing that resurface now in our world politics. And we had migrants then coming to Edmonton, where we live, that were from kind of Southeast Asia, and then there was waves of migration of people from Chile that might have been. Now we have people from the Middle East. And I think we need to remember about our collective history and make sure that we are kind to those people who are coming, just like our families came, for new opportunities, and to escape war, and be understanding as much as we can and realize that yeah, people have been through a lot before they came to Canada. Let's, should we open it up to questions? I think we've got like just time for one or two, and I don't want to take away from Meredith's presentation, but do you guys have a few questions? And there will also be later during our screening.
I just want to say something too, because I have a Finnish name, Alona, but I go by Pat. So there you go. And my husband's family, his grandfather came from Finland, and his name was Kinnerinen, and he moved to Fenderby, and he changed it to Kinner to fit, and he was a businessman, and he wanted to get his business to flourish, so he changed his name as well. So, happened here too.
My Polish neighbor changed his name to a very English name as well. It's like Massachusetts, they changed it to Gil. I don't know, I guess he wanted a short name that would fit in and not show his heritage too.
I'd like to bring attention to Marko Lindström, because she directed each one of my ethnic films about Finns. She would tell me what archives to go to. I couldn't get some information. It was closed at the National Archives of Canada. I was told it's closed for 100 years. So she said, go to Minneapolis. So I went to Minneapolis. I stayed in a bed and breakfast place for a whole week. And that's where I got a lot of the information. And workers' archives in Finland. So everything that I presented in the films, I could document them from information that was achieved going to the archives.
And the Finnish connection.
So any other questions? Okay, let's take the mic off Mum, and we're going to move it over to Meredith.
I'm supposed to introduce Meredith.
Yeah. Oh, so I'm going to leave it on.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. Good thinking, Mom. So Dad, we're going to switch over here, and I'll just close this out.
I have had a written introduction, but it's in my bag.
Do you want me to get your bag?
So I will. Meredith and I met in Minneapolis many, many years ago when I showed my film on Sointula. So we became friends. Meredith is not Finnish background at all, but she's researched all the history that she includes in her book. She's also a psychologist, and I found that I had something that touched me very deeply. The main character, Rose, in this story has lost her sight. She's gone blind, and it's because her father is missing. I was one of the 80,000 children taken to Sweden during the Russian-Finnish War. We all just had a name tag, and we were held 2 weeks in quarantine. So after that, we got into our destination. But that's not really I had a wonderful time in Sweden, wonderful people that I lived with till I was 12 years old. And at the age of 12, I had a letter from a lawyer saying your parents have divorced. So I was supposed to go and live with my father. So I didn't meet my mother until I was over 50 years old. And it's another story, but Meredith deals with things like that in her book, and I was able to relate to it and understand what had happened to me. It also talks about her book. She deals with secrets in our life, and this was, I would think, a secret that I had lived with all my life, and I haven't found the answer yet. I don't know, my mother and I never connected at all. So I came to the conclusion that some of us are made to be mothers, and maybe that's why I really chose that role, because we have 5 children and one of them is adopted. So somehow I had this yearning to be a mother, or I had an idea what a mother should be like. So this is what her book has done to me.
Thank you. So should we take this right off?
While I'm being mic'd by Ava, I just want to thank you, Pirkko. It was one of the more powerful experiences of my life in researching my novel, Quarry, which is a Finnish-American mystery, although there are Irish immigrants in it, and a lot of it takes place in Massachusetts, the UP, the Upper Peninsula, some in Karelia, some even in Lapland. But I wanted to say I met Pirkko at Fin Fest USA some years back, and it was a kind of falling in love because of her understanding of how much almost all immigrants have trauma in their lives. Why would you leave your country unless there was something problematic going on? It might be economic, you may be lucky people had children or job offers in other countries, but very, very often, for centuries, immigrants have moved from where they live because of trauma. So my book is really about trauma, it's about resilience. All the characters are working class, these are not fancy people, but these are survivors, or most of them are, but I won't say more about that because that is part of the story, is the mystery of what happened to Rose Virkunen's father, which leads to the mystery of what happened to her parents on the Irish side and the Finnish side and all the secrets involved, which in turn leads to the mystery of particularly her great-uncle, Urho. So the book, Quarry, starts with a girl who is 8, who's traumatically blind, and you follow Rose Virkunen through till her mid-20s. But in the meantime, you get the backstory of her parents and of her grandparents. So there are characters whose lives are literally still changing in their 80s and 90s in the book. And that's an important theme to me as a psychologist. We talk about minorities, but when you think about it, one of the signs of failing civilizations is when they don't take care of their young and when they don't take care of their old. And I think we need to be very aware of the stories of children and also the stories of elders. Quarry is an illustrated novel. I think we need lights off. It was written without illustrations, but I have a very dear friend who's an artist, an established artist, who's published other books, including on the for the dancer Barbara Dilley, who was a premier dancer in New York for a long time, with Mark Morris. And my illustrator's name is Joan Anderson. And this is a film festival, but what I think makes a novel perhaps appropriate to present to you is that the illustrated novel was a feature of the 19th century novel. Dickens and Thackeray put it on the map, but if you think of Victor Hugo, you think of Robin Hood, these were stories that were fully illustrated, and that was a collaboration often between the artist and the author. This is different from the graphic novel, which is a huge contribution to our times, which I like very much. I'm thinking most recently of Sherman Alexie's The Part-Time Indian, fantastic novel of a Native American or a First Nation person. All right, so we decided to illustrate Quarry, and it is lavishly illustrated with 40-some illustrations. This quotation that I'm going to next show you by Jose Saramago God does not deserve to see speaks obviously to this traumatized child who's seen something that has in some sense blinded her, although she does not go blind right away, and pertains to secrets that no one will talk about. But also you see a child who's lost faith that people will tell the truth, and she's lost faith in God, which, you know, is unusual for a young child. It has to do with her feeling that the evangelical Lutheran Church has oppressed people in her life who are from Lapland, and their views, their mysticism is not welcome. All right, it is often the illustrations involve at least 2 images, photo collage, sometimes 3. There are drawings, there are paintings overlaid. This actually is a midsummer cocoa or bonfire, and the picture is taken by Jim Kurti on the UP, one of the honorary consulates to Finland. But the layers of the collage are meant to capture what in the book is a layering of history. There's a character, it's actually Rose's father, whose name is Granite, and his father worked in the granite quarries of Massachusetts. But if you think about it, metamorphic rock, what is it? It's been crushed. It's been put under pressure and heat, and you have different layers, different kinds of stones coming together. And I think that's really the way our lives work, particularly for people who've experienced vast change within their own lifetime, is that we are many things that have been melded together. This is, I hope I say this right for the Finns in the room, is suoni rauta, a bloodletting knife. It both figures in the novel. I won't say how, it's part of the mystery, but as you know, bloodletting knives are still actually used in many parts of the world. We even now understand through the use of leeches, sometimes removing blood from the body is a part of working with illness. These are beautiful drawings, I think, by Joan Anderson of 2 suoni rautas, which are actual ones in museums. But I also wanted to capture the idea that immigrants often feel that they must cut away or cut off a part of who they are. They can feel sick at heart and eager to release their stories, but no one who is either interested or no one they feel safe to tell them to. Also, I think bad blood has been often used to denigrate people of other colors and ethnicities. So images of blood are in the novel. This actually is the last illustration of Quarry, but it has one of a sentence or two, which is one of my favorite in the book, and it is in a way at the heart of the story. Old mystery, old magic, perhaps the oldest spell of all, to dress in the raiment of another, animal, woman, spirit. Cross-dressing is a theme in the novel. It's about the shameful identity of one character, but it's also cross-dressing as a disguise. As you probably know, people have crossed borders to get out of countries by dress. A woman is a man is a woman, or they have changed their hair color, all kinds of things. So it's also the notion of, is my identity hidden, as it often is for cross-dressers even today, or is my identity hidden because of need for safety? All right, chickadees, North American boreal, fly through Quarry, uniting Finns of North America and Finns of Lapland. The grandmother of Rose, the Finnish grandmother, her mummo, has the boreal chickadee, is in some sense her favorite creature, and Rose is always watching the chickadees of New England, and a lot of the novel is about trying to fuse also what is resilient between immigrants now, immigrants in our past, to really understand that even though many immigrants suffer, many immigrants sometimes die lonely and not understood or not having their stories told, so many immigrants are the most incredible models of resilience in our lives in so many ways. This is a rune of protection from Sami culture, but also from other cultures. I recently met a woman, it was very eerie, an artist in Omaha, Nebraska, where I live with my husband, who had it tattooed on her wrist, and I almost fainted since it figures in the book. And we got talking, and she didn't know that it was Sami, but she also knew that it was found in Eastern Europe. And it's just a beautiful ink drawing by Joan, and then she just found that branch on the ground and photographed it. But this also is to talk with you a little bit about, this has come up today by former earlier presenters, that often we don't take an interest in our parents' culture or our grandparents' culture, but also sometimes parents and grandparents are made very nervous by the choices of their children, that their children are becoming interested in things they don't want them to be interested in. In the story, there's a hippie son of Finnish immigrants who's becoming interested in Sami culture and all things to do with the Kalevala, and he does, in fact, in the course of the book, become a young scholar of the Kalevala at a university. But he is interested in mystical traditions which many immigrants have had to suppress, particularly in Christian cultures. So culture can skip generations. This is a double spread illustration. There are two photographs made by a nature photographer in Nebraska, whose name is Kirby Zickafoos. But this is just one of my favorite things I have ever heard. There is no such thing as a real Finn. This was said by Eva Kurti, who's Jim Kurti's father, and Jim just happened to mention this to me. And yet I think this captures a lot of what we're talking about today. What's a real Canadian? What's a real American? You know, we are so many things. And it's very sad when we have intolerance toward the breadth and the depth of all the things that make us citizens of a country or aspiring citizens of a country. All right, I'm going to read now, so I'll need the lights back on, a short passage which I chose specifically knowing I would be here in Thunder Bay, the largest community of Finnish in North America. So what you need to know here is that I will first read a little preamble to this chapter. But basically, we are going to see a sauna scene where an older woman, Maya, and who's one of the most grounded figures in the book, holds a lot of the history of the family and of the Finnish culture in Quincy, Massachusetts. But she is used to both people who don't want to hear it, and she's used to people who want to hear it but don't really want to pay close attention. They want to hear the parts they want to hear. So you get her telling Rose, who's a young woman by now, some things about her, that is Rose's great uncle, who Rose is very interested in. She doesn't like this great uncle. She doesn't understand the suffering he's been through. Here's the preamble to a chapter called Hunger. You will hear, by the way, references to her uncle Urho and Urho's brother Jake. And Urho was a red, and Jake was of the white faction in Finland. So you're seeing a little bit of politics here too. I'm trying to think if there are any other characters you'll hear. I think that's it. You're going to hear references to the Great War and also times before and after independence. Okay, hunger. All around the northern hemisphere, the cold has settled in to stay. It's the season of hunger. The sun looks down at the sparkling white trees where Karelia straddles the scarred border of Finland and Russia. It's always been contested ground, Karelia. The most powerful and brutal squatter has the rights until a more powerful and more brutal squatter comes along. Russia, Sweden, Germany. Karelia is a trade route, an attack route, an escape route. Shifting borderland, wild, beautiful, forbidding place. Primeval forest too thick to penetrate. Strings of bright lakes, small and marshy, or wide as the sea, some of them icy now. Home of Finland's epic, the Kalevala. a string of bright myths from which Finland made a nation. Isn't that what a nation is? A string of myths. Just add water, just add blood. And now we get the scene in the sauna. It's always hunger that starts things, Maya says, settling heavily on the lowest bench of the women's side. Hunger for food, hunger for freedom, hunger for a better world, hunger for love. 15 when Urho first left Karelia with his father. They headed west across Finland looking for work and ended up in Tampere. 1916 maybe. A bad business. Jake would never let him forget it. Urho, you should have stayed clear of the Bolsheviks in Tampere, he'd say. Jake stayed home with their mother, he had more of her Russian Orthodox blood. A farmer's daughter who didn't trust change, didn't trust any government, or any firebrand anti-government thing for that matter. Always talking about Swedish taxes, Russian taxes, Finns conscripted into somebody else's war. She didn't want the one son left to her, your grandfather Jake, her baby, caught up in politics. Beads of sweat rise on Rose's arms as she listens to Maya. Tampere was the place for work, Maya says, like Detroit, an industrial city between lakes, different water levels, you know, lots of electricity. A candle flickers at the end of the sauna bench. Rose thinks of water pouring from one icy lake into another, and Urho on a bridge maybe, looking down into that water, thinking about the places water can carry you to. I don't think Urho's father cared about Bolshevism, Maya says. Just wanted Finnish independence, same as any Finn. Coming from Karelia, he feared Russian help. But Urho's young, see, and young want change, and Bolshevism promised change. Maya shakes her head. So there were the Finnish whites and there were the Finnish reds. Urho and his father, they end up on the wrong side, the losing side, the red side. But you only know these things later, right? Easy for people who come later to say, you should have known which side to be on. Maya scowls at Rose, a girl who came later. Reds were for the little guys, I remember Urho saying. Maya laughs. You're looking very red yourself, Rusina. Rusina means raisin in Finnish. She dips her rag in a bucket of cold water and wrings it and hands it to Rose. The whites were more murderous than the reds, some say. Urho is sure of it, given what happened later. The Civil War and all, Finns splitting apart. Whites were a bastard child, he'd say, of the old Swedish marriage of church and state. Rose's stomach growls. What is she hungry for? She nods vaguely. She wants Urho's story, she thinks, not some long, complicated Finnish history. Finns had to choose sides, Maya says. And Karelia, always caught in the middle, between the Swedes and Russians, at the least. Anyway, by the time the Great War is over, what you call the First World War, Finns are starving. Finns are slaughtering each other. Nobody's in charge. Maya glances at Rose, sees that her mind is wandering. She stands. Okay, that's enough heat for today. Oh, come on, Maya, I want to know what happened. Maybe you do and maybe you don't. People want to know what they want to know. Most people don't want to know the whole of anything. In the dressing room, Maya points at the shiny white ceiling. Urho's paint job, right? Sometimes I think he just couldn't get enough white after all that red. Couldn't get enough cover. She laughs bitterly. And Americans, they never stop seeing red. Senator McCarthy, the Red Scare, something you wouldn't remember. Again, the implied blame, the bitterness of knowing what others never knew or have forgotten, or do not really want to know. Hook my brassiere for me, Rose. My shoulders are so stiff. Rose shivers in the cold air of the dressing room as she hooks Maya's brassiere. Gus showed me a picture once, Maya says. I could barely stand it. Twisted bodies of young men dumped in a hole, slaughtered during or after the Civil War, Finns slaughtering Finns. Total anarchy. Some say 8,000 Reds were executed in Finland. Whites too, but not near so many because the whites won. Maya sits on a bench, one sock in her hand. She seems impervious to the cold. Most Finns don't want to think about it. Even now, the murders, the beatings, the blacklists, 11,000 prison camp deaths in Finland, Rose, not Sweden or Russia. So many deaths, and one of them Urho's father. Bundled in a fleece pullover, her body holding sauna heat, Rose walks up the stone steps behind Maya of the stone steps of the old temperance hall. Urho nearly starved, Maya says. He needed to get out of Finland. Traveling by night, he reached Sweden. The only work he could find was Kaski, burning tracts of forest for Swedish farmland. Always some kind of a fire in Urho's life. And loneliness, Maya's breath catches. Imagine that, Rose. No one to hear your breath come and go. No one who knows you. Not really. Say what you will. People don't know you unless they know what you've been through. For the first time, Rose imagines it, that Urho's silence and Urho's loneliness and his bitterness and meanness is part of something bigger. And I'll stop with that today. So I just want to say thanks to all the Finnish Canadians and Finnish Americans who helped me with researching Tuareg. And also congratulations to Finland on its hard-won independence and the many ways in which it leads the world today as a democracy. Thank you so very much.
Well, I'd like to say, we can take a couple of questions, right?
Yeah, a couple of questions, and yes, and the book will be available. You can buy it up here or across the way.
We'll bring it in. We'll have it in the merch section at the church. And I just want to say, you have come on your own dime to our festival in the year of the 100th anniversary of Finland's independence, Canada's 150 of creation of a nation. It's just really wonderful to have you here and that you made this extra effort, and I really appreciate it.
So glad to be here. Happy to take any questions that you may have. Like how the hell I got involved with Finns. You want to hear how the hell I got involved with Finns?
Yes.
Okay, so I was a psychologist at Cambridge Hospital in Massachusetts. This is the story part, and I'll give you the Finnish part. And I heard a presentation about a man who was married with children who was caught by his wife cross-dressing in the backyard in a sort of ritualistic way. He was very ashamed. He was the patient being described. Somehow that image stayed in my mind, shame. And then I was told that a old Finnish temperance camp near Quincy, Massachusetts was opening to the public because they couldn't afford to keep up the land and the buildings unless they had some monies coming in. So they opened up during this warmer seasons for one weekend, one day of each weekend. So I went with a friend who knew about it, and I was just I found it compelling. Here I was in the women's side with 4 generations at least, bucket babies, and the women on the bench of all ages, including, I remember, a toothless woman in her 90s who kind of ruled the sauna and always made a point to sit in the hottest spot of the sauna. And then, of course, going into the beautiful lake there. And I just got to know people, and I kept going back. And in my mind, these figures, a young man, an alcoholic, first generation as in born in the U.S., Finn, who had an identity as a cross-dresser, and this community just began to form in my mind. So I did the research. I also had godparents who went to Finland when I was a child, and they were professors of English at Beloit College in Wisconsin. And they came back and they showed slides of them coming out of sauna naked. And I was like, oh my God, my godparents. No, naked, I'm only 11 or something, you know. It's like, we used to hear them making love upstairs too. you know, these people are too old to make love. This is, but anyway, and they running into the lake, and that captured my imagination. I just remember those slides of people running across the snow into a lake. Anyway, any other questions?
How long have you been working on the book?
Oh man, I started this book maybe 15 years ago, and it was more or less finished about 10 years ago, but there were various things that arose in our family in terms of illnesses and things that needed attending to, and I'm glad I waited, because otherwise I wouldn't have had the possibility of working with an artist, and also it's Finnish independence now, so, and it's time of immigrants, it's a time of immigrant stories, so it feels like the right time.
I'm just so happy that you came up with the concept of the, you know, like, how did you discover this whole thing of the illustrated book? That you gave that little tidbit about it being, you know,
yes.
typical in the 19th century.
Well, you know, my husband and I have long been interested in visual arts. We watch film a lot. In Omaha, Nebraska, we have fabulous independent cinema. And so I've always been very visual. And in some ways, words are my craft, but I'm very visual. People say the book is cinematic. And I like a sensual book. And the illustrated novel is something I grew up with as a child. I just remember, didn't you have books you looked ahead, you wanted to see the pictures, and then you go back and read it. And you keep stopping and looking at the pictures, and I thought, so much of our notions of novels today is read it faster, get it on an audio book, get it in some form that really removes it from visual presentation. So we just decided that we really wanted to do a book which is also something you want to hold and it feels good in your hand, and it is enriched with visual images that you can ponder and think, what does that mean to me? So almost an invitation to slow down as you read.
Fabulous. Fabulous.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Okay. Woo! Thank you. So how much are the books?
The books, I'm selling them, it's not cheap because it is an illustrated hardback. I'm selling them for 35 Canadian, but I want to say if you really want the book and you just can't afford that, please, just come and tell me and we'll figure it out.
And was it just for find out.
Yeah, like I mean, all of a sudden I just noticed those numbers weren't going anywhere. So
it took me a while to get the streaming going, so stop it.
Hi.